The soft pitter-patter of rain had been a constant companion throughout the day, but as evening approached, the gentle shower transformed into something more menacing. Dark clouds loomed overhead, painting the sky in shades of deep gray and bringing in early darkness to the usually bustling streets of the riverside neighborhood. The weather forecast had warned about heavy rains, but nobody expected the intensity that nature had in store. Raj had just finished his evening shift at the Happy Paws Veterinary Clinic, where he'd spent the last 3 years working as a veterinary assistant. It was the kind of job that brought both joy and heartbreak, some days filled with wagging tails and successful recoveries, others with the weight of difficult decisions and sad goodbyes. But today had been relatively quiet, mostly routine checkups and vaccinations for local pets. As he walked home, his mind wandered to the simple pleasures awaiting him: a warm cup of tea, maybe some leftover dal chawal from lunch, and the comfort of his small but cozy apartment. The rain had soaked through his jacket despite his umbrella's best efforts, and his shoes made squelching sounds with each step on the wet pavement. The streets were nearly empty, most people having sought shelter from the increasingly heavy downpour. The Harrison Street Bridge was part of his daily route home, a historic structure that had stood witness to the town's growth over decades. Its weathered stone railings and sturdy frame had survived countless storms, though tonight's deluge seemed determined to test its resilience. The river below, usually calm and peaceful, had transformed into an angry, swollen mass of churning water. That's when he heard it, a sound that made him stop mid-step. At first, it was barely noticeable above the symphony of rain and rushing water. But there it was again. A cry that didn't belong to the storm. It was a sound that tugged at his heart, a whimper that spoke of fear and desperation. Raj had heard many animals in distress during his years at the clinic, but something about this cry felt different, more urgent. He approached the bridge's railing, his hands gripping the wet stone as he peered over the edge. The rain made it difficult to see clearly, forcing him to wipe water from his eyes repeatedly. The river below was a threatening sight, its usually gentle current now a violent rush of debris-filled water that crashed against the bridge's supports. And there, on a narrow concrete ledge barely visible above the rising water, was a sight that made his blood run cold. A German shepherd, her belly swollen with pregnancy, was trapped on the precarious perch. The ledge, likely part of the bridge's old maintenance platform, was no more than 3 feet wide. The dog's tan and black coat was matted from the rain, and she trembled visibly, her eyes wide with terror. Every few seconds, she would let out another cry, a sound that seemed to carry all the fear and helplessness of her situation. Raj's heart raced as he assessed the situation. The dog's condition was particularly concerning. Her pregnant state meant she would be heavier, less agile, and more vulnerable to stress. The one collar around her neck suggested she wasn't a stray, but rather someone's lost pet who had somehow found herself in this terrible predicament. "Hey there, girl," he called out softly, trying to keep his voice calm and reassuring despite the panic rising in his chest. The dog's ears perked up at his voice, and she whimpered again, her tail giving the slightest wag of acknowledgement. This small response gave Raj hope. She wasn't completely paralyzed by fear, which meant there might be a chance to help her. But the situation was deteriorating quickly. As Raj watched, another wave crashed against the ledge, sending spray over the dog's paws. She scrambled back, pressing herself against the bridge's concrete support, but there wasn't much space left to retreat. The river was rising steadily, and the ledge that was her temporary sanctuary was disappearing inch by inch beneath the murky water. Time was not on their side. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and darkness was settling in, making visibility increasingly poor. Raj could see the exhaustion in the way the dog held herself. She must have been trapped there for hours, her energy slowly draining as she fought to maintain her position on the slippery ledge. He quickly pulled out his phone, thankful that it was still dry in his jacket's inner pocket. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed emergency services, but the response made his heart sink. "We're experiencing high call volumes due to flooding across the city," the dispatcher explained apologetically. "All emergency teams are currently engaged in critical rescue operations." Raj understood. The entire region had been dealing with the effects of unusually heavy rains for the past week. But understanding didn't make the situation any less desperate. The pregnant dog below needed help now, not in an hour or two when resources might become available. Looking around, he spotted his umbrella where he'd dropped it in his rush to look over the railing. An idea formed in his mind. He quickly removed his jacket, ignoring the cold rain that immediately soaked through his scrubs. Using the skills he'd learned from years of handling nervous animals at the clinic, he began speaking in a soft, steady voice to the trapped dog. "It's okay, sweet girl. I'm going to try something, all right? Just stay calm for me." He tied his jacket around the umbrella's handle, creating a makeshift rope. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. Carefully, he lowered the improvised lifeline toward the dog, hoping she might somehow grasp the jacket with her teeth. But the wind and rain made it difficult to control, and the frightened animal only pressed herself more firmly against the concrete, too scared to move toward the strange object swaying in front of her. Rage pulled the umbrella back up, his mind racing. The dog's cries were growing more desperate, and he could see her trembling intensifying. She needed help immediately, but he couldn't provide it alone. As much as it pained him to admit it, this rescue would require more resources and expertise than he had. Standing there in the pouring rain, Raj made a decision. If emergency services couldn't help right away, perhaps the community could. He had seen how people could come together in times of crisis, and right now, this frightened mother-to-be needed every bit of help she could get. With renewed determination, he pulled out his phone again, this time opening his social media apps. He would need to act fast, but he wasn't about to let this dog face her ordeal alone. Help would come. He would make sure of it. The next few minutes felt like hours as Raj stood in the relentless rain, his eyes fixed on the trapped dog below. Each crash of water against the bridge's supports sent a shiver through his spine, knowing how close the waves were getting to the terrified animal. The river, usually so peaceful, had become a monster of churning brown water, carrying tree branches and debris from upstream. The pregnant German Shepherd's situation was getting worse by the minute. The ledge that had become her prison was now barely visible above the waterline. What had probably started as a 6-foot-wide platform was now reduced to less than 3 feet, forcing her to press herself tightly against the bridge's concrete support. Her brown eyes, filled with fear and exhaustion, kept darting between Raj and the rising water, as if begging for help while fighting her instinct to run from humans. Raj noticed more details about her condition that made his heart ache. Her coat, though dirty and wet, showed signs that she had once been well cared for. The red collar around her neck was worn but good quality, suggesting she hadn't been astray for very long. Her swollen belly made it clear she was in the final stages of pregnancy, probably just days away from giving birth. Every movement she made was careful and deliberate, protecting not just herself but the precious lives she carried. Another wave crashed against the ledge, this one bigger than before. The dog let out a frightened yelp as cold water sprayed over her feet. She tried to back up further, but there was nowhere left to go. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. How long had she been fighting to keep her balance on this precarious perch? Hours? The whole day. The thought of her struggling alone for so long made Raj's chest tight with worry. He checked his phone again, hoping to see responses to his social media posts. The local community Facebook group was starting to light up with comments, but help hadn't arrived yet. The rain was falling harder now, making it difficult to even see the dog clearly. The streetlights had come on, casting weak yellow light through the curtain of water, but they did little to improve visibility. "Hold on, girl," Raj called down, trying to keep his voice steady and encouraging. "Help is coming. Just hold on a little longer." The dog's ears perked up at his voice, and she gave a small whimper in response. Despite her fear, she seemed to understand that he was trying to help. This small sign of trust made Raj even more determined to save her. He couldn't bear the thought of those intelligent eyes closing forever in the cold river below. Time seemed to move differently in crisis situations. Each minute stretched endlessly as Raj watched the water rise inch by inch. He tried his umbrella jacket contraption again, but the wind had picked up, making it even harder to control. The makeshift rope swayed wildly in the gusts, spooking the dog rather than helping her. After several failed attempts, he had to admit this approach wasn't going to work. The sound of the river was getting louder, drowning out even the steady drumming of the rain. Debris rushed past below. Branches, plastic bottles, even what looked like part of someone's garden fence. Each piece of floating junk was a potential threat, capable of knocking the exhausted dog off her precarious perch if it hit the ledge just right. A particularly large branch came spinning down the river, headed straight for the ledge. Rage held his breath, hands gripping the railing so tight his knuckles turned white. At the last second, the current pulled it just far enough out to miss the concrete platform. The dog watched it pass with wide, terrified eyes, her whole body trembling. That's when Rage noticed something that made his blood run cold. The dog's breathing had become more labored. Whether from fear, exhaustion, or the stress of her situation, she was starting to show signs of serious distress. As a vet assistant, he knew the dangers of prolonged stress on a pregnant animal. This wasn't just about keeping her from drowning anymore. The lives of her unborn puppies were at risk too. He pulled out his phone again, this time to call his supervisor at the clinic. Dr. Kumar always kept her phone on for emergencies, and this certainly qualified. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. It was well past closing time. Dr. Kumar, I'm sorry to wake you, but there's a pregnant dog trapped on a ledge under the Harrison Street Bridge. She's in serious distress, and the water's rising fast. I've called emergency services, but they're overwhelmed with flood rescues. The exhaustion vanished from Dr. Kumar's voice immediately. How long has she been there? What's her condition? As Rage described the situation, he could hear Dr. Kumar moving around, probably already getting dressed to come help. Her next words confirmed it. I'm on my way. I'll bring some rescue equipment from the clinic. Keep talking to her, keep her calm if you can. And Rage, you did the right thing calling me. Those words gave him renewed hope, but the situation below was deteriorating rapidly. The dog had started making a new sound, a high-pitched whine that cut through the noise of the storm. Her movements were becoming less coordinated, her exhaustion clearly taking its toll. The water had risen another inch in just the few minutes he'd been on the phone. A strange calm settled over Rage as he realized he might have to do something desperate. He couldn't just stand here and watch her drown. The ledge was maybe 12 feet below the bridge. A dangerous jump in normal conditions, nearly impossible in this rain. But if help didn't arrive soon, he was just starting to remove his shoes, considering his options, when he heard something that made him pause. Was that a siren in the distance, or just the wind playing tricks on his ears? He strained to listen, trying to filter out the sound of rain and river. No, there it was again, definitely a siren, and it was getting closer. Rage felt tears of relief mixing with the rain on his face. Help was finally coming. Now they just had to hope it would arrive in time before the river claimed its intended victim. The dog looked up at him again, and in her eyes he saw a flicker of the same hope he was feeling. Somehow, someway, they were going to get her out of this. The wail of approaching sirens brought a glimmer of hope, but the river wasn't waiting for anyone. The water kept rising, inch by merciless inch, while Rage and the frightened German Shepherd waited for help to arrive. He had already tried everything he could think of to reach her, but each attempt had ended in failure, leaving both of them more desperate than before. His first try with the umbrella and jacket hadn't worked. The makeshift rope was too unstable in the wind. Then he'd spotted a long tree branch that had washed up against the bridge's support. For a few heart-stopping minutes, he tried to maneuver it toward the ledge, thinking maybe the dog could use it as a walkway. But the branch was too wet, too slippery, and the current kept trying to pull it away. After nearly losing it to the river 3 times, he had to give up on that idea too. Dr. Kumar arrived first, her old blue car splashing through puddles as she pulled up to the bridge. She jumped out carrying a large medical bag and what looked like climbing rope from the clinic's rescue kit. They sometimes used it to help get injured animals out of tight spots, but nothing quite like this. The fire department is on their way, she said, joining Rage at the railing. They've diverted a team from the south side. She peered over the edge, her expression growing serious as she assessed the situation. The dog looked up at them, her eyes reflecting the dim street lights, full of exhaustion and fear. Poor thing, Dr. Kumar muttered, pulling out her phone's flashlight for a better look. She's definitely in the last stages of pregnancy. See how low her belly is hanging. We need to get her out of there fast. This kind of stress isn't good for her or the puppies. They tried lowering a rope with a loop at the end, hoping to somehow get it around the dog's body. But the wind kept blowing it off course, and the terrified animal wouldn't go near it anyway. She just pressed herself harder against the concrete, whimpering every time the rope swung close. Time was running out. The water had risen another few inches, and now only about 2 feet of the ledge remained above the river. The dog had to constantly shift her position to keep her balance, her legs trembling with fatigue. Each wave that crashed against the ledge made her cry out in fear. More people started showing up, drawn by Raj's social media posts. An old man who lived nearby brought some sturdy rope. A couple who had been walking their own dog stopped to help, offering their dog's leash to add to the rescue equipment. A young woman who worked at the local grocery store arrived with blankets and towels. Everyone had ideas, but nothing seemed to work. They tried making a rope ladder. The dog was too scared to use it. Someone suggested trying to lure her with food, but she was too frightened to even look at the treats they lowered down. Each failed attempt felt like another precious minute wasted. The fire truck's lights finally appeared through the rain, casting red and white flashes across the wet street. 2 firefighters jumped out, already wearing their water rescue gear. They quickly set up powerful spotlights, illuminating the scene below the bridge for the first time. In the bright light, they could all see just how bad things had gotten. The ledge was barely there anymore, just a slim strip of concrete above the rushing water. The dog's red collar stood out against her wet fur, and they could see her sides heaving with each frightened breath. The fire chief, a stocky man named Mr. Singh, assessed the situation quickly. "The water's too rough for a boat rescue," he said, checking the river's flow. "And that ledge won't hold much longer. We'll have to do this from above." They started setting up their rescue equipment, ropes, harnesses, pulleys attached to the fire truck. But everything took time, precious minutes that the dog on the ledge didn't have. The water kept rising, uncaring about their preparations or plans. Just as they were ready to begin the rescue, something happened that made everyone's heart stop. A large log, probably from someone's garden upstream, came spinning down the river. Unlike the earlier debris, this one was heading straight for the ledge, and there was no chance it would miss. "No," Raj shouted, but his voice was lost in the storm. The log slammed into the concrete ledge with a sound they could hear even over the river's roar. The dog yelped in terror as part of her already tiny sanctuary crumbled away. She scrambled to keep her footing, her claws scraping against the wet concrete. "We have to go now," Mr. Singh shouted to his team. "Forget the extra safety lines, there's no time." One of the firefighters, already in his harness, stepped up to the railing. But before he could get in position, the dog lost her battle with gravity. Her back paws slipped off the crumbling ledge, and she scrabbled desperately with her front paws, trying to hold on. Raj couldn't watch anymore. Without thinking about the consequences, he grabbed one of the rescue ropes and started climbing over the railing. He heard Dr. Kumar shout his name, felt someone try to grab his arm, but he was already moving. The fire chief's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop. Wait for the harness." But there was no time for waiting. The dog's strength was giving out. He could see it in the way her legs shook, hear it in her terrified cries. This was their last chance. Either he acted now, or those frightened brown eyes would disappear into the dark water forever. As he gripped the wet rope and looked down at the churning river below, Raj sent up a silent prayer. He wasn't a particularly religious person, but right now, he needed all the help he could get. The pregnant dog looked up at him, their eyes meeting in a moment of perfect understanding. She knew he was trying to help. And somehow, despite everything, she was still holding on, still fighting. Now it was his turn to fight for her. The power of community showed itself in the most unexpected ways that rainy evening. What started as one person's desperate social media play turned into something much bigger as neighbors from all around began showing up at the Harrison Street Bridge, each bringing whatever they thought might help save the trapped dog. Old Mr. Kapoor from the hardware store came running with his toolbox and several lengths of rope, his usual slow walk forgotten in the urgency of the moment. Behind him, Mrs. Lee from the flower shop brought all the strong gardening twine she had, along with a basket full of towels. The local gym owner, Mr. Patel, arrived with climbing gear he used for weekend mountain trips. The rain kept pouring, but nobody seemed to care about getting wet anymore. People held umbrellas over each other as they worked together, passing equipment and suggestions back and forth. Someone had even brought hot tea in thermoses, sharing it among the growing crowd to ward off the evening chill. Raj watched all this from his position by the railing, his heart full at seeing how many people had come to help. The pregnant German shepherd below seemed to sense the energy too. Her cries had changed from desperate fear to something more hopeful, though she still trembled on her precarious perch. Dr. Kumar took charge of organizing everyone, her years of handling emergency cases at the vet clinic showing in how calmly she gave directions. "We need to work quickly but carefully," she explained to the gathered volunteers. "That dog is exhausted and terrified. One wrong move could send her into panic." The local police had also arrived, helping to direct traffic away from the bridge. Officer Gupta, known for his soft spot for animals, was personally coordinating with the fire department team that was on its way. "They're bringing their water rescue equipment," he announced. "Should be here in 10 minutes. But 10 minutes felt like an eternity when every second counted. The water level had risen so high that waves were now regularly washing over the ledge where the dog stood. Each time the water hit her paws, she would scramble to adjust her position, and each adjustment looked more desperate than the last. Mr. Patel stepped forward with his climbing gear. "Look," he said, laying out his equipment on the somewhat dry patch under a large umbrella someone was holding. "These ropes and harnesses are meant for rock climbing, but they might work here. We could try to lower someone down." Before he could finish his explanation, a loud crack echoed through the air. A piece of the concrete ledge, weakened by the constant battering of the waves, had broken off. The dog let out a terrified yelp as her standing space suddenly became even smaller. "We can't wait for the fire department," Raj said, his voice firm despite his racing heart. "That ledge is falling apart. We need to try something now." The crowd murmured in agreement. Mr. Patel quickly began setting up his climbing gear, checking and double-checking each knot and connection. Dr. Kumar pulled out her phone and called the emergency vet hospital, knowing they might need immediate care once the dog was rescued. Little Anita, who couldn't have been more than 12 years old, pushed through the crowd with her father. "Use this," she called out, holding up what looked like a large basket. "It's from my mom's laundry room. Maybe the dog could sit in it while you pull her up." Dr. Kumar's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. We can line it with towels to make it more stable and comfortable. The sides will help keep her from falling out during the lift." Everyone sprang into action. Mrs. Lee's towels were arranged in the basket, while Mr. Kapoor used his tools and rope to create a secure harness system for it. Others helped secure the climbing ropes to solid points on the bridge, following Mr. Patel's experienced instructions. The sense of unity was incredible. People who might normally pass each other on the street without a word were now working together like a well-oiled machine. Someone had even set up a bright battery-powered work light, holding it steady to illuminate the rescue attempt. Through all this, Raj kept talking to the dog, his voice steady and encouraging. "Just a little longer, girl. See all these people? They're all here to help you. You're not alone anymore." The dog's eyes stayed fixed on him, and something in them seemed to understand. Despite her exhaustion, despite the terror she must have been feeling, she held on. Her spirit touched everyone watching. This brave mother-to-be, fighting so hard not just for herself, but for her unborn puppies. Time seemed to move differently as they prepared for the rescue attempt. Every splash of water against the ledge made hearts stop. Every whimper from the dog spurred faster action. The cold rain continued to fall, but the warmth of human kindness seemed to keep everyone going. Finally, everything was ready. The basket had been secured with multiple safety lines. The main climbing rope was tested and retested. Mr. Patel had helped Raj into the harness, checking every strap and buckle with professional care. "Remember," Dr. Kumar said, gripping Raj's arm, "don't make any sudden movements. Try to keep your voice calm and steady. She's scared, but she knows your voice now. That's our biggest advantage." The crowd had grown quiet, the only sounds being the rush of the river and the steady drum of rain. Everyone held their breath as Raj prepared to climb over the railing. This was their chance, maybe their only chance, to save this dog's life. Looking at all the faces around him, seeing the hope and determination in their eyes, Raj felt a surge of confidence. This wasn't just one person trying to save a dog anymore. This was an entire community coming together, proving that even in the darkest moments, humanity's light could shine through. "Ready?" Mr. Patel asked, his hands steady on the guide rope. Raj nodded, taking a deep breath. The next few minutes would determine everything. As he gripped the wet railing and prepared to begin the rescue, he silently thanked every person who had dropped whatever they were doing to come help. Sometimes it really did take a village, or in this case, a bridge full of caring strangers turned teammates. Raj's feet left the safety of the bridge as he began his descent toward the trapped dog. The cold rain pelted his face, making it hard to see, but he kept his eyes fixed on the German Shepherd below. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, but his hands remained steady on the rope. All those years of helping scared animals at the clinic had taught him that staying calm was crucial. Animals could sense fear and anxiety. Above him, Mr. Patel controlled the main rope with expert hands, while Dr. Kumar supervised the rescue basket's separate line. The crowd had fallen completely silent, their collective breath held as they watched Raj slowly make his way down. Only the sound of the rushing river and the steady drum of rain filled the air. "Easy now," Mr. Patel called down, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Take it slow and steady." The wet rope felt slippery even through his gloves, but the safety harness held firm. Raj tried not to look at the churning water below, focusing instead on the frightened mother-to-be who needed his help. She watched his every move, her ears perked forward despite her exhaustion. "It's okay, sweet girl," he called out softly, trying to keep his voice steady and reassuring. "I'm coming to help you. Just hold on a little longer." The dog's tail gave the tiniest wag in response to his voice, a sign that made Raj's heart leap with hope. Even in her terrified state, she remembered him as someone trying to help. That small show of trust might make all the difference in what they were about to attempt. As he got closer, he could see just how dire the situation had become. The ledge was crumbling more with each wave that hit it. Chunks of concrete occasionally broke off and disappeared into the dark water below. The dog's paws were bleeding slightly from hours of gripping the rough surface, yet still she held on, protecting the precious lives she carried. Finally, Raj reached her level, hanging just a few feet away. Up close, he could see she was even more beautiful than he'd first thought. Her coat, though wet and dirty, showed hints of the classic German Shepherd coloring, and her eyes held an intelligence that touched his soul. "Look what I brought you," he said softly, carefully pulling the rescue basket closer. They had lined it with soft towels, making it as inviting as possible. "This is your ticket to safety. What do you say we get you out of here?" The dog watched the basket swing gently beside him, her ears flicking back and forth as she assessed this new development. She was clearly interested, but fear kept her pressed against the concrete wall. Another wave crashed against the ledge, making her cry out in fear. "Now, girl," Reg called, his voice urgent but still gentle. "You can do this. I know you're scared, but you have to trust me." He reached out slowly with one hand, letting her catch his scent. This was the moment of truth. Would she trust him enough to let him help? Or would fear win out, keeping her trapped until the ledge gave way? For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, ever so slowly, she stretched her neck out and sniffed his hand. Her cold, wet nose touched his fingers, and he felt rather than heard her tiny whimper of hope. "That's it," he encouraged, carefully moving the basket closer. "You're so brave. Just a little more." Suddenly, a massive wave, bigger than any before, slammed into the ledge. The impact sent vibrations through the concrete, and a large chunk broke away, the chunk right where the dog had been standing. She screamed in terror as her back paws lost their grip, her front paws scrabbling desperately at what remained of the ledge. Rage didn't think, he just acted. In one fluid motion, he swung himself closer and wrapped his arm around the dog's body, just as her last grip on the ledge gave way. The weight of her pregnant body nearly pulled them both down, but the safety harness held firm. "I've got you," he gasped, holding her tight against him as she trembled violently. "I've got you, sweet girl. You're safe now." Above them, he could hear shouts of both fear and encouragement from the crowd. Mr. Patel's voice cut through the chaos. "The basket. Get her in the basket." The rescue basket swung close, and with strength he didn't know he had, Raj managed to lift the terrified dog into it. She seemed to understand this was her salvation. Once in the basket, she curled up as best she could, her whole body shaking but her eyes never leaving Raj's face. "Pull them up," Dr. Kumar shouted from above. "Quickly." The ascent seemed to take forever, though it probably only lasted a few minutes. Raj kept one hand on the basket, steadying it as they were lifted, while talking constantly to the dog. He told her how brave she was, promised her she was going to be okay, assured her that her puppies would be born somewhere warm and dry. As they neared the top, dozens of hands reached out to help. The basket was lifted carefully over the railing first, many people supporting it to keep it steady. Dr. Kumar immediately wrapped warm blankets around the shivering dog, checking her vital signs, even as others helped Raj back onto solid ground. The moment his feet touched the bridge, his legs nearly gave out from relief and adrenaline. Someone caught his arm, helping him stay upright. Through the rain, he could see tears of joy on many faces in the crowd. These strangers who had become a team, united in their determination to save one precious life. The dog was already looking better, her breathing steadier as Dr. Kumar examined her. When Raj knelt beside her, she lifted her head and licked his hand, a simple gesture that brought fresh tears to his eyes. In that moment, drenched and exhausted but overwhelmed with joy, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity at the Happy Paws Veterinary Clinic. Dr. Kumar had insisted on bringing the rescued German Shepherd there immediately, knowing that both mother and her unborn puppies needed urgent care after their ordeal. The small waiting room, usually quiet at this late hour, was filled with concerned faces. Many of the people who had helped with the rescue hadn't wanted to go home until they knew the dog would be okay. Little Anita sat with her father, clutching the now empty rescue basket that had played such a crucial role in saving the dog's life. Mr. Patel had carefully coiled his climbing ropes but stayed too, occasionally checking on Raj, who was still shivering slightly despite the warm, dry clothes someone had brought him from the clinic's spare supplies. Inside the examination room, Dr. Kumar worked with gentle efficiency, her experienced hands checking every inch of the exhausted mother-to-be. The dog lay quietly on the padded table, no longer struggling or showing fear. It was as if she knew she was finally safe, surrounded by people who wanted to help her. Her paws are scraped up from holding onto that ledge for so long, Dr. Kumar explained as she cleaned and bandaged the small wounds. And she's definitely dehydrated, but otherwise, she paused, using her stethoscope to listen carefully to the dog's belly. A smile spread across her face. The puppies are all doing fine. Strong heartbeats. This brave girl kept them safe through everything. Raj sat nearby, his hand resting gently on the dog's head. She had refused to let him move too far away, whimpering anxiously whenever he stepped back. Now her tail thumped weakly against the examination table every time he spoke, and her brown eyes followed his every movement with complete trust. "We found something else," Dr. Kumar added, holding up a small device. "When I scanned for a microchip, we'd actually got a reading. Let me check the database." Everyone held their breath as she typed on the computer. Finding the dog's owners would be wonderful, but Raj felt an unexpected pang in his heart at the thought. In just a few short hours, he had formed such a strong bond with this brave mother-to-be. "Ah, here it is," Dr. Kumar said finally. She was registered to a family named Reddy, but she frowned at the screen. They moved abroad 6 months ago. According to the notes they left with their old vet, they couldn't take their pets with them. They gave this one, her name was Luna, to a friend to rehome. "Luna," Raj repeated softly, scratching behind the dog's ears. She responded to the name immediately, her tail wagging a bit stronger. "But something went wrong, didn't it, girl? The friend didn't find you a home." Looking at her condition, "I'd say she's been on her own for at least a month," Dr. Kumar confirmed. "She's thin under all that fur, though the pregnancy makes it hard to tell exactly how much weight she's lost. She must have been surviving on scraps, probably staying near the river where people sometimes feed the strays." The story touched everyone's hearts. This former family pet, abandoned and alone, yet still fighting to survive and protect her unborn puppies. Mrs. Lee, who had been quietly arranging food and tea for everyone in the waiting room, wiped tears from her eyes. What happens to her now? Anita asked the question everyone was thinking. She can't go back on the streets, especially with babies coming. Before anyone could respond, Luna let out a small whine and tried to sit up on the examination table. Her eyes were fixed on Raj, and she didn't settle again until he moved closer, letting her rest her head against his chest. I think, Dr. Kumar said with a knowing smile, Luna has already decided where she wants to go. Raj looked down at the dog in his arms, remembering how it felt to hold her over that rushing water, promising her everything would be okay. He had meant every word. His small apartment didn't allow pets, but I'll move, he said firmly. I've been thinking about finding a new place anyway, somewhere with a little yard. He gently stroked Luna's wet fur. What do you think, girl? Want to come home with me? Luna's response was immediate and clear. She stretched up and licked his face, her tail wagging with more energy than she'd shown since the rescue. Everyone in the room laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. Well, that's settled then, Dr. Kumar said, writing in her medical chart. But she'll need to stay here tonight for observation and fluids. Those puppies could come any day now, and I want her somewhere safe when they do. I'm staying too, Raj announced, pulling up a chair. Luna immediately settled down, knowing her new friend wasn't going anywhere. Slowly, the crowd of well-wishers began to disperse, each person stopping to pat Luna or whisper a few kind words before leaving. Mr. Patel promised to help Raj search for pet-friendly apartments. Mrs. Lee insisted she would bring fresh food for both Luna and Raj first thing in the morning. Even little Anita made plans with her father to pick out some toys for the puppies once they arrived. As the last visitors left, Raj sat in the quiet clinic, one hand resting protectively on Luna's side, where he could feel the subtle movements of her puppies. The storm outside had finally passed, and moonlight streamed through the windows, creating a peaceful scene so different from the chaos of just a few hours ago. You know, he said softly to Luna, who was drifting off to sleep, finally able to truly rest. They say rescue dogs never forget who saved them. But the truth is, you rescued me too. You showed me how many good people there are in this world, how strangers can become family in the blink of an eye. He smiled as she snuggled closer in her sleep. We're going to give those puppies the best life, Luna. And you'll never have to worry about being alone again. I promise. 2 weeks after the dramatic bridge rescue, Raj's new apartment was filled with the gentle sounds of tiny puppy whimpers and the happy sighs of their proud mother. Luna had given birth to 6 healthy puppies just 3 days after her rescue, safely surrounded by warmth and care at the veterinary clinic. Now they were all settled in their new home, a cozy ground-floor apartment with a small garden that seemed perfect for a growing dog family. The community that had come together on that stormy night hadn't forgotten about Luna. Every day, someone would stop by to check on the new mother and her babies. Mrs. Lee from the flower shop brought fresh vegetables for Luna's meals, insisting that a nursing mother needed extra nutrients. Mr. Patel, who had helped save Luna with his climbing gear, had spent an entire weekend helping Raj puppy-proof the apartment. Little Anita and her father had become regular visitors, bringing new toys and spending hours watching the puppies. Today, they sat on the floor near the large, comfortable whelping box that Dr. Kumar had helped set up, watching as the puppies explored their world with wobbly steps and curious noses. Look at the one with the white paws, Anita whispered, pointing to the smallest puppy who was attempting to climb over his siblings. He's so brave, just like his mama. Luna lay contentedly in her bed, keeping a watchful eye on her puppies while enjoying gentle pets from Raj. Her coat had regained its shine, and her eyes sparkled with health and happiness. The scared, exhausted dog from the bridge was now a confident, loving mother who trusted her human family completely. You know, Raj said, watching the puppies play, we need to start thinking about names for all of them. And eventually, we'll need to find them good homes. Finding homes for the puppies hadn't been difficult at all. Word of Luna's rescue had spread through the neighborhood and beyond. Dr. Kumar had started a waiting list at the clinic for people interested in adopting the puppies, but she was being very careful about screening potential owners. These special puppies deserved special homes. Old Mr. Kapoor from the hardware store had already been approved to adopt one of the puppies. He'd lost his elderly dog a few months ago and had been lonely ever since. When he visited, he would sit quietly with Luna and the puppies, telling them stories about his own childhood pets. The local police station had expressed interest in one of the stronger male puppies for their canine training program. Officer Gupta, who had helped during the rescue, thought it would be fitting for Luna's puppy to grow up helping others, just as so many had helped his mother. Dr. Kumar herself had fallen in love with the smallest female puppy, the one who always wanted to be held. She has her mother's gentle spirit, she'd said, watching the tiny pup snuggle into her hands. As Raj watched the puppies play, he remembered that terrifying night on the bridge. The storm had washed away some of the old concrete supports, and the city had closed the bridge for repairs. Every time he passed by, he said a quiet thank you to whatever fate had led him to hear Luna's cries that evening. The sound of the doorbell interrupted his thoughts. It was Mrs. Verma from next door, bringing her weekly donation of homemade treats for Luna. She had been one of the first to welcome them to the building, declaring that having dogs in the complex would bring good luck to everyone. "How are our little stars doing today?" she asked, kneeling carefully to peer into the whelping box. Luna greeted her with a friendly tail wag, completely at ease with all these visitors who had become part of her extended family. "Growing stronger every day," Raj replied, accepting the bag of treats. "Luna's being such a good mother. She even lets us handle the puppies now, though she still keeps a close eye on everyone." The puppies were starting to show their individual personalities. The largest one, with a black patch over one eye, was always the first to investigate new toys. His sister with the brown ears loved to be cuddled and would cry until someone picked her up. The smallest boy with white paws was proving to be the adventurous one, always trying to climb out of the whelping box. Watching them grow and develop was like watching little miracles unfold every day. Each new skill, the first time they wagged their tails, their first wobbly steps, their first tiny barks, was celebrated by their extended human family. "You've given them such a wonderful start in life," Mrs. Verma said, watching Luna gently nudge one of the puppies back toward the center of the box. Both Luna and her babies. It's amazing to think how differently things could have turned out if you hadn't hurt her that night. Reg reached down to scratch Luna's ears, smiling as she leaned into his touch. "I think we all got a fresh start that night," he said. "Luna showed us how one small act of kindness could bring an entire community together. And now look, she's raising her family surrounded by more love than she probably ever imagined possible." As if understanding his words, Luna stood up and carefully stepped out of the whelping box. She pressed against Raj's leg, looking up at him with those same trusting brown eyes that had captured his heart on the bridge. Then she turned and went back to her puppies, settling down to nurse them with a contented sigh. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, creating warm patches on the floor that the puppies would soon learn to nap in. Outside, the sounds of children playing and birds singing filtered in through the open window. It was hard to believe that just 2 weeks ago, this happy family had almost been lost to the storm. But they had survived, thanks to the courage of one mother dog and the kindness of an entire community. And now, as Raj watched Luna caring for her puppies, he knew that this was just the beginning of their story. Each puppy would go on to bring joy to a new family, spreading the ripples of that one act of rescue far beyond what anyone could have imagined on that rainy night. 1 year had passed since that stormy night at Harrison Street Bridge. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Raj's apartment as Luna lounged in her favorite spot by the garden door. Her coat gleamed with health, and her eyes sparkled with contentment as she watched the birds in the small garden outside. The apartment walls now held framed photos telling their story. Luna's rescue, the day her puppies were born, and pictures of each puppy with their new families. Dr. Kumar had helped ensure each puppy found the perfect home, and regular updates kept flowing in about their progress. The smallest puppy with white paws, now named Rocky, had grown into a confident police dog in training. Officer Gupta often brought him by to visit his mother, and Rocky would bound around the garden with the same adventurous spirit he'd shown as a tiny pup trying to climb out of the whelping box. The largest puppy, the one with the black patch over his eye, lived with old Mr. Kapoor just 2 streets away. Named Sultan, he had brought new life to the elderly man's hardware store, greeting customers and keeping his owner company during quiet afternoons. Sometimes, when Luna joined Raj on his morning walks, they would stop by the store, and mother and son would share a joyful reunion. Dr. Kumar's puppy, the smallest female she'd named Rani, had become the clinic's unofficial mascot. Her gentle nature helped calm nervous patients, just as her mother's trust in humans had survived despite her terrible ordeal. Every time Luna visited the clinic for checkups, Rani would curl up next to her, showing that the bond between mother and daughter remained strong. The other puppies had found equally loving homes. One lived with a family in the countryside, spending his days running through fields and playing with children. Another had become a therapy dog at the local hospital, bringing comfort to sick children. The third had found her calling as a companion to an elderly couple who adored her. But the biggest change had happened in the neighborhood itself. Luna's rescue had created lasting connections between people who might never have met otherwise. Mrs. Lee's flower shop now had a water bowl outside for passing dogs. Mr. Patel had started volunteering at the local animal shelter, teaching other rescuers about safe animal handling. Little Anita had convinced her school to start a pet care club, educating other children about responsible pet ownership. The Harrison Street Bridge had been repaired, made stronger than before. A small plaque now marked the spot where Luna had been rescued, reminding passers-by that miracles could happen when people came together. Local children would often stop to read it, and their parents would tell them the story of the brave mother dog and the community that saved her. Raj's life had changed in ways he never expected. His work at the veterinary clinic took on new meaning, every scared animal reminding him of Luna's trust on that rainy night. He'd started a social media page sharing Luna's story, which had inspired other communities to create their own animal rescue networks. Luna herself had become something of a local celebrity. People would smile and wave when they saw her walking with Raj, many remembering how they'd stood in the rain that night, holding their breath as she was lifted to safety. She greeted everyone with the same gentle warmth, especially children, who she seemed to have a special fondness for. The garden of Raj's apartment had become a gathering spot for the neighborhood. On warm evenings, many of the people who had helped with the rescue would stop by. They'd sit with Luna, sharing stories and snacks, their conversations full of laughter and friendship. Luna would move from person to person, accepting pets and treats, her tail wagging constantly. Sometimes, during these gatherings, someone would marvel at how one desperate cry for help had brought so many people together. How a single act of kindness had rippled outward, touching not just Luna and her puppies, but an entire community. The bridge incident had shown them the power of unity, of strangers becoming family in the face of crisis. As the sun set on another peaceful day, Raj sat in the garden with Luna's head in his lap. The evening air was filled with the sounds of birds settling down for the night and children playing in nearby yards. Luna sighed contentedly, completely at peace in the home and family she had found. "You know," Raj said softly, scratching behind her ears just the way she liked, "they say every dog has its day. But you, Luna, you had more than that. You showed us all what it means to be brave, to trust, to love unconditionally." Luna looked up at him with those same soulful eyes that had captured his heart a year ago. "You didn't just survive that night on the bridge, you helped create something beautiful. Something that will live on in all the lives you've touched." Luna's tail thumped against the garden path, and she snuggled closer to Raj. Around them, the neighborhood settled into evening routines, countless small acts of kindness continuing the legacy of that stormy night when a community had come together to save one precious life. And in those quiet moments, surrounded by the peace they had built together, both human and dog knew that sometimes the greatest miracles weren't just about survival, they were about finding family in the most unexpected places.